Have you ever noticed something strange? The moment you begin to wake up, truly wake up, something unexpected happens. You start questioning the very thing society told you was sacred, desirable, even necessary. Marriage. Why is it that as consciousness expands, marriage suddenly feels heavier? Why do awakened people look at the idea of forever and feel confusion, fear, even resistance? And why are so many spiritually conscious adults quietly wondering, am I meant to walk this life alone? If those questions have been echoing inside you, you're not broken. You're not cynical. You're not too spiritual for love. What's happening is something far more profound. Awakening doesn't make you reject love. It makes you see clearly. It dissolves the myths you inherited about marriage, the roles you were expected to perform, and the silent belief that partnership is the ultimate measure of a meaningful life. In this video, we're going to explore why awakening collides so strongly with the traditional model of marriage, and why this collision is actually a doorway, not a dead end. You're going to see the difference between real love and love as a social contract, and why awakened people often feel out of place in relationships that were built on fear, habit, or expectation. We'll walk through the 5 psychological and cultural traps that make marriage feel misaligned after spiritual growth, and more importantly, how you can navigate love without sacrificing your freedom, your truth, or your inner peace. So before we begin, let me ask you, have you ever felt different when talking about marriage? Like the script everyone else follows wasn't written for you? If yes, comment below so I know you're here. Because this conversation is exactly for you. Let's begin. Awakening doesn't make you anti-marriage. It makes you anti-illusion. That's the first thing most awakened people discover. You don't become someone who rejects marriage. You just can't accept the version of marriage society handed to you long before you were old enough to question it. Before awakening, marriage feels like a prepackaged answer, a box everyone steps into without truly asking whether it fits. It comes wrapped in 3 familiar promises. Safety, having someone to lean on in life's uncertainty. Relief from loneliness, as if another person could fill the inner emptiness. Social validation, the idea that being married means you're stable, successful, normal. But after awakening, that picture begins to crack. You start noticing what lies beneath the glossy surface, a social structure built on roles and expectations most of us never questioned. You realize the gender roles embedded in traditional marriage, the strong man, the nurturing woman, no longer reflect your truth. The loss of individuality that happens when your identity collapses into a title, husband, wife, begins to feel suffocating. The unspoken expectations of sacrifice, service, and mutual possession no longer resemble love. They resemble an unwritten contract. For many middle-aged Americans, especially those who've been through a divorce, awakening adds a surprising clarity. Not because they were wrong, but because they were never given the tools to see deeply before. A 52-year-old man once said after his awakening, "I didn't marry out of love. I married because that's what every man around me did at 28. A 48-year-old woman shared, "I never questioned marriage. After awakening, I finally asked, did I choose marriage or was I conditioned into it?" Here's the truth most people are afraid to admit. Many marriages aren't born from love-driven decisions, but from fear-driven decisions. The fear of being alone, the fear of not being enough without a partner, the fear of standing out in a culture that treats marriage as a milestone of legitimacy. But here's the key point. Awakening does not destroy marriage. It destroys the illusion behind why you thought you needed marriage. And once that illusion breaks, you finally have the chance to rebuild, perhaps for the first time, a definition of love that isn't shaped by fear, expectation, or social pressure, but by genuine maturity. In the next section, we'll explore why awakening makes you stop searching for someone to complete you, and how that shift transforms the very nature of love itself. Marriage stops being a rescue mission. That's the shift most people never expect. Because for so long, we're taught that partnership is where we go to be healed, held, fixed, completed. But awakening changes the geometry of the heart. It doesn't make you cold. it makes you clear. Before awakening, you choose a partner to fill the empty spaces. Carl Jung said that before individuation, the process of becoming whole, we don't choose partners from wholeness. We choose them from absence, from wound, from shadow. We look for someone who carries what we've disowned. Strength when we feel weak, care when we feel unlovable, validation when we feel invisible, direction when we feel lost. In this unconscious state, partnership becomes a kind of psychological bandage, a place we go not to grow, but to stabilize the parts of ourselves we haven't yet learned to meet. For many people, this is what their first marriage was built on. Not wholehearted love, but silent compensation. After awakening, you face the spaces within you instead of outsourcing them. Then awakening arrives, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. But when it does, it shines a light on all the places you once hoped another person would fill. You begin to see your loneliness, your insecurities, your unmet needs, not as evidence of unworthiness, but as invitations to heal. And when you tend to those inner spaces, something profound happens. You stop searching for the missing piece. Because you realize it was never missing. You had simply never turned toward it. This is why awakened adults often feel less hungry for a relationship, more skeptical of traditional romance, less attracted to superficial dating dynamics. Not because their heart is dimmed, but because their inner emptiness is no longer the one choosing. The common mistake: confusing wholeness with emotional shutdown. A lot of awakened people hit this point in panic. They think, maybe I've lost the ability to love. Maybe something inside me broke. Maybe I'm too independent now, but nothing is broken. And independence is not the problem. They're simply mistaking self-sufficiency for emotional closure. There is a big difference between, I don't need anyone because I'm closed, and I don't need anyone because I'm whole. One is armor, the other is awakening. I once spoke to a 60-year-old man who divorced after his awakening. He told me, I just don't fall for people easily anymore. But as he explored further, he realized, it wasn't that his heart stopped feeling. It was that his heart no longer accepted borrowed emotions. Superficial chemistry no longer worked. Trauma bonding no longer felt romantic. Attachment didn't feel like love. His heart had simply raised its standards to match his consciousness. The lesson: when you no longer seek completion outside, you begin to seek resonance. You're no longer looking for someone to plug into your emptiness. You're looking for someone whose soul moves in the same rhythm as yours. This is the beginning of freedom-based relationships, where you don't stay because you need each other. You stay because your truths align. In Part 3, we'll look at the next revelation of awakening: why traditional marriage structures often clash with the inner freedom you're growing into, and what kind of partnership actually supports your awakening instead of shrinking it. Most marriages are two shadows trying to love each other. That is the uncomfortable truth Jung hinted at, and awakening makes unmistakably clear. Because before we become whole, we don't actually fall in love with a person. We fall in love with the image we project onto them. We're not drawn to who they are, but to who we need them to be. Before awakening, love built on projection instead of presence. Jung taught that the psyche projects everything it cannot yet see in itself. So when we meet someone who triggers longing, excitement, or desire, we assume they're the one, when really, they're a mirror reflecting unmet parts of our own psyche. We project strength onto someone who looks confident, tenderness onto someone who simply listens, stability onto someone who seems grounded, magic onto someone who gives us a brief escape from our pain. But what we're falling in love with is not the person. It's the story we're writing about them. And when two people in this unconscious state marry, it's not a partnership. It's a psychological exchange of unspoken contracts. You heal my wounds, and I'll heal yours. After awakening, the fog lifts and you see the human being, not the fantasy. Awakening dissolves the haze around your partner. Suddenly you see they are not your savior. They carry their own trauma, and both of you have been reacting to each other's wounds, not relating from your wholeness. This is why so many awakened adults in midlife look back on their previous marriages and say, We didn't grow together. We just coped together. But the clarity goes deeper than what most surface-level spiritual videos explain. Awakening doesn't just help you see your partner clearly. It reveals the repeating patterns you kept enacting, the push-pull cycles that felt like passion but were really unhealed attachment wounds, the silent expectations you never voiced but carried anyway, the communication gaps that no amount of talking ever seemed to bridge. Awakened people become extremely sensitive to emotional dishonesty, the subtle ways both partners avoid their truth. And when one partner awakens faster than the other, the marriage can begin to feel suffocating, not because there is no love, but because the honesty required for growth is missing. The common mistake, believing that a good marriage has no conflict. Many people think a successful marriage is peaceful, conflict-free, harmonious. But conflict isn't the problem. Avoidance is. A mature relationship isn't defined by the absence of tension. It's defined by the presence of truthful communication and the ability to repair the bond instead of repeating old attachment patterns. Two people who have never faced themselves cannot truly face each other. The lesson awakening shows you the parts of yourself you've been placing into another person, and that realization transforms your entire understanding of compatibility. Compatibility stops being, you fit my wounds, and becomes, you meet me as I am, and I meet you as you are. In Part 4, we'll explore the next challenge awakening brings, why spiritual growth often creates a mismatch in relational pace, and how to navigate when one partner evolves faster than the other. Marriage asks for stability. Awakening asks for truth. And for many adults in midlife, this becomes the first real fracture between who they were and who they are becoming. The existential pivot, when life asks you to rethink everything. Somewhere between the ages of 40 and 60, many Americans experience what psychologists now call an existential pivot, a turning point where external success stops feeling like enough. You begin to ask, what is the meaning of my life? What is my soul actually here to do? Why do I feel trapped inside a life I once thought I wanted? What kind of spiritual legacy do I want to leave behind? Awakening intensifies these questions. It pulls your attention inward, toward the parts of yourself you neglected while trying to play the role society assigned to you. Suddenly, freedom isn't a luxury. It becomes a spiritual necessity. Truth isn't optional. It becomes oxygen. Inner peace isn't a nice-to-have. It becomes the compass guiding everything else. Awakened priorities, what your soul values begins to change. After awakening, people often find themselves craving things that traditional marriage structures rarely prioritize. Private inner space to think, breathe, feel, and grow. Creative energy that isn't drained by constant relational expectations. Spiritual practices that require solitude and boundaries. Energetic autonomy, where your mood, identity, and purpose aren't absorbed by someone else's narrative. This doesn't mean you stop loving people. It means you stop abandoning yourself in order to maintain a relationship. Where the tension begins, traditional marriage versus sacred personal space. Conventional marriage teaches, share everything, merge everything, live as one. But an awakened person begins to feel, I want connection, not collapse. I want intimacy, not enmeshment. For someone who is awakened, sacred space isn't avoidance. It's survival. It's where clarity is born. It's where alignment is restored. It's where the soul breathes. This is why, if one partner hasn't awakened at the same pace, marriage can begin to feel suffocating. Not because love is gone, but because the structure itself no longer fits the evolution happening inside. Real quotes from awakened adults illustrate this beautifully. A man in his late 50s said, I don't want a wife. I want a partner who respects my solitude. A woman in her 40s added, I don't want a house with someone. I want a life with someone. A subtle difference, yet it changes everything. What she meant was, I don't want shared walls. I want shared purpose. I don't want proximity, inner alignment over outer approval. When awakening unfolds, you stop living for approval. From family, from society, from tradition. You begin living from alignment with your truth, your purpose, your energetic rhythm. And once you prioritize alignment, Any structure that demands self-abandonment starts to feel too small. Not because marriage is wrong, but because the old version of marriage no longer supports who you are becoming. The lesson. This isn't a rejection of marriage. It's a shift in what marriage must become in order to remain meaningful. Marriage can still be sacred, but only if it evolves from a contract of roles into a conscious partnership built on truth, freedom, and mutual growth. In Part 5, we'll explore what this new kind of partnership looks like, and how two people can love each other without losing themselves in the process. Awakening doesn't end relationships. It demands a higher version of them. Because once you've outgrown the old ways of loving, you can't go back. You can't pretend anymore. You can't shrink yourself to fit a structure that no longer reflects who you are. But that doesn't mean love is over. It means love must evolve. Relearning the language of mature connection. After awakening, you no longer relate from fear, defense, or emotional reactivity. You begin learning a new emotional vocabulary, one grounded in truth rather than survival. It looks like not avoiding conflict, but not fighting either. Speaking from clarity, not from wounded reaction. Knowing when you need closeness and when you need space, without guilt, without threat, without punishment. This is the opposite of the old pattern where you either collapse into the relationship or run from it. B. Building a new model of love. Two wholes walking together. Love after awakening stops being about ownership, obligation, or completing each other. Instead, it becomes two whole individuals choosing to meet without filling each other's emptiness, without forcing each other to evolve at the same speed, without melting into one identity. This model honors both connection and independence, closeness without consumption, intimacy without loss of self. C. The 3 types of post-awakening relationships. Not every relationship survives awakening, but each type carries its own wisdom. 1. Reconstructed marriage. Both partners awaken, maybe at different times, but in the same direction. The relationship gets rebuilt with new boundaries, new truth, new maturity. 2. Compassionate completion. The relationship ends with love rather than resentment. Both recognize we're no longer aligned, but we honor what we were. This is increasingly common among awakened adults in their 40s, 60s. 3. Sacred partnership. Two souls meeting without roles, without masks, without ownership. A connection built on resonance, not obligation. Less about who are you to me, and more about who are we becoming together. D. The key questions every awakened person must ask. These questions act like a compass, pointing you toward truth instead of fear. Am I staying out of fear, or choosing out of truth? Does this relationship expand me or shrink me? Is love flowing naturally, or am I negotiating myself into smallness? If you answer them honestly, clarity always emerges. Practices for loving without losing yourself. Practical steps to anchor awakened love into real life. Journaling your shadow projections. What am I putting onto them that actually belongs to me? Somatic awareness. What does my body do around this person? Open, tighten, collapse, breathe. 1 to 2 weekly silent reset days. No noise, no obligations, just inner recalibration. Non-threatening communication such as, this is what my soul needs right now. I'm not leaving you. I'm returning to myself so I can return to you. These practices turn relationships into conscious healing spaces rather than unconscious battlegrounds. The lesson love after awakening is no longer a contract. It becomes a meeting between two free souls. Not to complete each other, not to fix each other, but to walk side by side with truth, spaciousness, and sacred intention. Up next is the outro, where we close this journey in a way that leaves your audience hopeful, reflective, and deeply connected to their own awakening path. So here we are at the end of this journey. A journey not about rejecting marriage, but about finally seeing it with awakened eyes. Because awakening doesn't ask you to burn down love. It simply asks you to stop performing roles that were never yours. To stop shrinking into identities you inherited. To stop negotiating your truth just to maintain an illusion of harmony. Throughout this exploration, we've seen that awakening doesn't make you anti-relationship. It makes you anti-disconnection, anti-self-abandonment, anti-illusion. It strips away the fantasies we were taught, that marriage is a guarantee of safety, that another person can complete us, that merging into one identity is a sign of devotion, that stability is more important than truth. And when those illusions fall, many people panic. They think something is wrong with them. But the truth is simpler, softer, kinder. You didn't outgrow love. You outgrew the version of love that wasn't conscious. Awakening makes you see that real partnership is not built on roles, expectations, or fear. It's built on resonance, on alignment, on two souls choosing each other, not from emptiness, not from loneliness, not from social pressure, but from truth. This is why so many awakened adults look back and say, we weren't partners, we were coping strategies for each other. It's painful clarity, but it's also liberating clarity, because you finally understand what you truly need, what kind of love your soul is actually calling for. Awakening doesn't end relationships. It demands a higher version of them. A version where truth matters more than comfort, where freedom matters more than possession, where inner peace matters more than social approval. Maybe your next chapter is rebuilding a marriage you're already in, but rebuilding it consciously, with boundaries, honesty, and space for two whole individuals to thrive. Maybe your next chapter is completing a relationship with compassion, not as a failure, but as an evolution. Or maybe your next chapter is meeting someone new, someone who can walk with you not as a role, but as a soul. Whatever your path becomes, remember this: when the soul awakens, love must evolve. And maybe the marriage you're meant for isn't the one society wrote, but the one your consciousness will one day create. If you'd like the next video to dive deeper into how to build a conscious relationship, leave a comment below. I'd love to continue this journey with you.